All right, the long-awaited Marvelous Design Masterclass. All right, you guys just, it's going to be a bunch of different videos that I'm going to be adding over a long time about all the knowledge that's kind of occurred with Marvelous Designer over the past 2.5 years. Anyways, we're going to start out with some simple stuff. For instance, we don't use it in our base set right here. Go ahead, when you get your file open like this, just go ahead and delete these well, you know, actually let's start a little quickly and say, look, okay, let's just go over a couple things. For instance, here's your move tool. You can click on something and move it out, both in 3 dimensions. You can move it over here in 2 dimensions. Realize right here is your arrange 3D arrangement and arrange flat 2D. As you see, arrange this as flat right here. Hit undo. You can arrange it like this and it comes back open. If you go over here and hit this button, it's going to simulate the space. And so as you see here, it wraps right back around on her. A couple more things we should look at before we move on. If you look at the space here, what these are stitches between them. If you go over here this space and you see this bottom row right here, this right here is the edit stitching, which you can see highlight over and get basically the different things these are. But if you highlight all these right now, you can see the same stitches are the same ones over here. If we click this piece right here, the blue dot shows you where on that space it is. That's very important. Some of the other things we'll go over later. You know, this is how you strap it on together. You can push and pull this at any point in time to fit it more on the body. It's a very versatile program for doing clothing, but what we're going to do is to do architecture. Now let's go ahead and hit stop on the simulation, which is also spacebar. Realize that can happen anytime. Looks like they've removed the other side of this. This looks like new, some tracing mechanisms and stuff like that. Anyway, so we're going to go up here to one thing you're going to do is go up here to preferences, settings, user settings. Realize in here default files, this file right here is your default when you come up. I don't like the body, so what I go ahead and do is delete out all these pieces. Hit delete. Well, that was, remember you have to be on this. That just deleted all of the stitching. So basically highlight all your pieces or hit Control R, hit delete. Now go over here to avatar, delete all avatars. Okay, now we have a blank space. Now what you can do is save. And you can go back up here and double check in user settings, default. That is a Z project file. So what we're going to go with file, save as project. We're going to, in these files, we're going to call it blank. All right, blank template. All right, and then we're going to go in settings, user settings, default items. Open this up, click on the blanks template, and have that as your default. When you restart, it will come into this, so you won't have to deal with that anymore. So now what we're going to do to get started is we're going to go over the pillow tutorial. There's one online about this, but I'm going to give you a different one. It's a very simple tutorial. We're going to go up here and hit the rectangle. We're going to click on one spot in the space. Remember, these are fairly large, but you can adjust it. If you hold down shift, you can lock it to a square and go up here. There's no really locking and snapping on the grid that I know of. If you see here on the left, this is called this kind of, I forget what they call it. It's a kind of view doggle gizmo. I don't particularly like that. It's screen coordinate gizmo. I like switching it to a local or a world, and I use those because it's more accurate. Now you see right here we can't tell the difference between the back and front. Also go over here and delete these. You're going to want to go to your fabric. You might want to save these in your settings. Under your fabric, you see over here it says material front and back. Click on the back. It says use the same material. Well, we can't see the difference between either side if we do that, so unclick that. Change the color to something arbitrary so that when you do see each side of it, you see that there's different sides. So the red is the back side, the white is the front side. If you see red, you're doing it wrong. Okay, so now what we're going to do is go back over here, click on the pattern edit, click the pattern. Now if you right click here, you can see there's a couple settings. You see copy here. Well, there's copy, and then there's mirror paste here. So we're going to copy and we're going to mirror paste it. Okay, so what that's basically going to do is it's going to flip the body. Alright, as you see, you can't tell from here, but basically this is here and here, so it's flipped the model. It's easier to stitch that way. Now what you also can do is right click. I think it's only on, it's right click on the left menu. There's different menus, and you see flip horizontally. So it's going to flip it around. As you see there, now you see the red side. And what you're basically going to do is you're going to click it, move it over to on top of it as best as you can, and it's going to be there. And you're going to move it back. All right. And so now we basically have two pieces like this. And we're going to stitch them together. So your stitch menu is up here. The way I like to do stitching is I like to think about it as looking at both windows at one time. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this piece right here. I'm going to click somewhere that will be near that side. So as you see where the blue dot here is, I'm going to hit my stitch. I'm going to click that area. See where my stitch is on here? That really does matter. So I'm going to click that area. Now I am going to click the other piece I wanted to stitch to, which is right there. Now I'm going to stitch over there. Well, I guess they've changed that. So now you see they've stitched together. There it is on there. We're going to do the same thing to the top piece. Stitch here. Stitch. Oh. Well, I am quite dissatisfied with that. They should have kept that feature. I thought that was really great. These stitches are little. You see how many stitches these are? This means that the polygon count is really high. So we're going to have to deal with that in a little while. You can check that out by these two over here, which we'll get into later. If you just click the mesh box, you can see how dense those polys are. Remember, these are not polygons. These are particles that form into polygons, which is a very, very high difference than other soft body programs. Matter of fact, I am making a claim that this is not a soft body program. It is a fabric program. It's a totally different animal. So again, we're going to do the same thing for the next piece. We're going to click on it and you'll see where it is. Now you'll know now basically that that's going to be the opposite of that. Okay, so there it is. Same thing at the bottom. Opposites each other. And now it's a closed figure. Now to deal with the high polygonness, we're going to go over here and click both things and look over here in the property editor. You see right here it says particle distance. This is what I was just talking about. We're going to switch that to about 100, and now you'll see that your stitching has readjusted for the new polygon count. We can look back at it. Now this seems a little more workable. Okay? Now that you have it all stitched together, you are more than welcome to hit the simulate. What you'll see is this object falling down to nothingness. And you don't want that. Once it's at the state, it's no help. Now you can hit snap back to 3D and it will snap back into itself. Alright? Or you can just hit undo. Either one is up to you. Now in order for our two pieces to have some sense of ability to inflate, we have to put pressure inside of them because they don't have any objects in them. So we're going to jump that up to 50. Now when we do, check, make sure I'm running. I am running. Now when we hit the simulate, now you see that we do have a bit of a thickness happening. And it seems to not have much pressure on himself. He seems to be sticking very well. I guess the new software is a little bit. Okay, so now what we're going to do is work with some of the adjustments. See, as you see now, it's starting to fall down. I think decreasing the weight in it a little bit will make it sit on itself a little bit. Get that weight down just a hair. Now, I want it to stand up so we can start to mess with it a little more. So what you can do is undo. Okay, we can redo the simulation. Alright, it's there. Now what I want you to do is I want you to go into here, back to these two tools we talked about earlier. What the first one does is it just moves it through a specific polygon. The red one will actually pin it. See, it says pin right there. What we want to go in and do is go in there and pin those top ones. Always look to your other one. Make sure you're doing it in the right spot. Now we're pinning those together. And now if you do the simulation again, it's not going to move anywhere. Alright? So you can keep it steady that way. We can start to adjust the inflation, and as you can see, it will work in that situation. Alright, now that we've done that, let's go over some of the other tools we have. Let's first start with fold arrangement. We'll get in later. Let's start with the tacking technique. Tacking is fairly new. Well, it's not terribly new anymore, but basically tacking will squeeze the object together, and it will not do very much. If you had another object there, you can tack it to it too. Now what we also can do, realize with any of these kind of settings, we can go in there and adjust that setting. As you can see, the tacking yet does not have any settings quite yet. We can grab that tack. It looks like here we have some thread length. We can adjust that to 10 and 1. It doesn't seem to be doing much. We really don't have, I think in newer versions we'll see this being a much more versatile tool, which we're not really seeing much adaptation to right now. Alright, so the next stuff we're going to go over is we're going to go over the fabric materials. Inside your fabric, if you click the fabric up in the top right, you can actually give it a name too. Down here you can say fabric A, and if you go down here in the details, first of all, let's go through some of the presets. Right now it's on default, which isn't a very strong one, but you can start to have some of the other ones. For like gabardine wool, it's a little looser, or for instance a belt buckle, it's very thick. You can see it starts to buckle on certain things. Or we can go into windbreaker, which it's very loose. That's actually pretty. Cotton, I know, is really loose. As you see, it's kind of loosening up a little bit. I think as you go down the list, it's stronger and stronger. Alright, let's go on the top. Going back to the properties of the mesh, let's look at wafting and warping. It's shrinking wafting percentage. Say if we jump this up to 10, it's going to go out to the left and the right, as opposed to the warping, which is going to go out the other way, up and down. So you see we can get a longer pillow, have adjustments in different ways. Now, so you know, realize at any point it can mess up, so just jump back to your original. That doesn't always work so great, but sometimes it does. We can switch that back to cotton, and it can settle again. Now in your settings, you also have the waving and warping within here. Very small adjustments with its stretch, which is normal like the other one. Its shearing will shear it per polygon. Its bending, it just adjust these. These are like very small tweaking settings. The ones I use the most are probably your density coefficient what you see down here, which it will really start to hang, and your friction coefficient. So when it does hit the ground, it's going to start to have a lot of friction with the ground or not. Alright, thickness, this is a new setting. We can actually add thickness directly to the material. This is a different thickness than per sheet. Over here we can add collision thickness. We'll get into that more when we're around objects. As you can see, we can adjust all these things. Just be very careful when you're going below 0. You can start to have problems with the polygons hitting each other. Alright, just give me a second. My food's making a smell. Alright, I'm back. Let's look at a couple more of the settings before we conclude this tutorial. We already talked about particle distance. Let's look at some other particle distance kind of situations. You can also, at any point in time, increase the simulation to 500. You're going to get a very low poly object, and you can have some very interesting formations as a result of that. You can and then drop down to a lower, and those settings will stay until you simulate it again. And as you can see, it will rationalize itself. Just let it sit for a minute, and will go back to itself. Or you can just undo. If you just drag it out, sometimes the best way sometimes is just jump back to the 3D arrangement. There, we're back to normal. As I said before, you can adjust that pretty easily. Drop it to 300. As you see now, it's a nice polygon mesh. We can up that to 100, and now it's the same physical structure but with a higher density. Alright, other things we can do, we can also get on here miscellaneous. We can change that to quads. Now you see we have a nice quadded out object, which is very good in bringing other programs. Yeah, and we can also, let's see, we can also adjust the grain in here. For instance, the seaming, we can adjust the seaming and folding. These are fairly adjustable. You won't see much on here. We'll get more of this when we start to deal with some of the other stuff. And even the stitching, we can turn the stitch. It has some issues, as you can see with that at the low poly. We increase the poly up, we might be able to see that a little bit better. So we go back to 100. Alright, as you can see here, the top piece is having some issues, but if you see those issues, you can always readjust it at the top, and you can see that's starting to work in there. We can do that with all of them, and you can see a flat change and all the sides. It's trying to turn over on the top of them. You see what's happening over here. It's having a different change to the object. Just always be careful when you're doing this stuff. Reset it sometimes, that will help. You see now we're having it almost layer on top of it. That stitch is a little different from other ones used before. I think one thing we're seeing is the thickness of the fabric having an issue. So if we drop it down back to 5, now we're seeing that adjust itself back to normal. You see there. Alright, well, that was a first good tutorial, and I will see you in the next one when we go over a little more complicated objects. Thank you guys. Talk to you then.